Bloomberg and the schools. In this film strip, you'll learn about the effect the mayor of New York City has had on public schools. Subjects covered will include history, politics, math, and the mayor's long-standing affection for organized labor. At the end of the film strip, you'll hear questions for discussion. New Year's Eve, Times Square, December 31st, 2013. It will be the beginning of a new year and a time for remembering years past. It will also be the start of a new mayor's term, and a time to look back on the one just ended. Michael R. Bloomberg. A lot has changed since he became New York's chief executive nearly a dozen years ago, but few areas of city government or city life have seen as much or as constant change as the city's schools. New York schools are where Mayor Bloomberg has said he hopes to have a lasting legacy.
We will test our educators, we will test our students, but the real test is that of political resolve, the test of ourselves. The need is real, the time is now. Without authority, there is no accountability. The public, through the mayor, must control the school system.
But with all the changes in the schools under Mayor Bloomberg, and all the controversies over many of those moves, sizing up the net impact of his school reforms is difficult. Are the schools better or worse? Let's look back at the Bloomberg reforms and see what we find. Let's remember what the schools were like before Mayor Bloomberg. Back then, mayors appointed some members of the Board of Education, but no one had direct control or accountability. Corruption and patronage were commonplace. So-called good neighborhoods had good schools. Struggling neighborhood schools were often underfunded, understaffed, and under-inspiring. Meanwhile, the majority of the city's high schools were seen as failures, dropout factories for urban youth. Many mayors had expressed frustration over their inability to directly operate the city's schools. Mayor Giuliani even talked about blowing up BOE headquarters. Mayoral control was the brass ring these previous mayors sought, but none succeeded until Bloomberg. Within his first year in office, the mayor convinced state lawmakers to shutter the Board of Education and replace it with a panel for education policy, over which the mayor exerted clear control. In tandem with securing control, one of Bloomberg's first acts was to appoint Joel Klein as school's chancellor. Klein had no real background in education. What Klein did have was vast experience in the business world and as a federal monopoly buster, skills the mayor thought would equip him well to shake up the schools. This set an early pattern for how the administration would seek fundamental change in schools, by breaking down established systems and swapping veteran educators for Ivy League lawyers and MBAs, importing the kind of private sector savvy that made Bloomberg a billionaire. With that team in place, Klein and Bloomberg pursued a core business school principle of creative disruption, operating on the idea that big change is better than incremental progress, and with little concern for public opinion. Changing the schools meant overhauling the way they were organized not once or twice, but 3 times. First, Bloomberg demolished the elected school boards responsible for the city's 32 school districts, but kept the district lines in place. Next, in 2003, 10 regions replaced those 32 school districts. And then in 2007, the DOE eliminated the regions in favor of principal autonomy, giving school leaders great independence over budgets, hiring, and schedules, so long as they met specific accountability targets. Within that new organizational structure, Bloomberg's team implemented a wide array of new policies. First, the city issued a single curriculum for all but 200 high-performing schools. Then, Bloomberg set about ending social promotion. Supporters backed his plan to retain struggling students. Opponents charged that standardized tests were given too much weight. No surprise, the mayor won. Indeed, test scores and other data increasingly drove decision-making and instruction at every level, from the schoolhouse to DOE headquarters near City Hall. Standardized tests have been put in place for children in grades 3 through 8. Access to middle and high school is dictated in large measure by how students perform on 4th and 7th grade state tests. And in 2007, the city inaugurated school progress reports, which use standardized testing data to grade the city's schools and determine which schools DOE will seek to close. Each measure has its flaws and its critics, but in Mayor Bloomberg's public schools, big data rules. Another hallmark of the Bloomberg years was his steadfast support for charter schools. A generation ago, charter schools were conceived as living laboratories where teachers would have the freedom to explore new ideas. Today, New York's 159 charter schools are more closely linked with disciplined, no-excuses teaching than with progressive pedagogy. Another 32 charters have been approved for 2013 and 2014, after the mayor is out of office. Early on, the DOE began a campaign to close large high schools, many with abysmal graduation rates, and replace them with new, small high schools of 400 to 600 students. Attention was directed to basic academics over extras like advanced science, foreign language, and team sports. Bloomberg and Klein also advanced new school models to serve older, undercredited students and transfer students who failed at traditional high schools. The DOE also revamped high school admissions. No longer bound by zone or zip code, students ranked up to a dozen schools and competed for admission at screened and selective schools. The creation of small high schools was supported in large part by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, one of several instances where private investment helped drive change in New York's public schools. New York wasn't the only city introducing education reforms. Some of the changes here, like emphasizing test scores, reflected changes in national education policy. But New York City, especially in its move towards smaller schools, public-private partnerships, and the use of data, was at the national reform forefront. The Bloomberg reforms were accompanied by higher school spending. It rose, on a per-pupil basis, nearly every year of his mayoralty, a fact for which Bloomberg, seen by many as a budget slicer, rarely receives credit. The DOE now spends more than $17,000 per student each year on average, and roughly $45,000 for special education students, more than any other U.S. city. But as the budget increased, so did the friction. With each school year, the pros and cons of having one person, the mayor, in charge of the schools became clearer. The mayor was able to implement changes quickly and comprehensively. But with the Panel for Education Policy acting as a rubber stamp, and the mayor firing members who voted against his wishes, there was no forum for debate about complex problems and complicated solutions. And with the DOE controlling not just the pace of reform, but also how it was measured, it became difficult to separate success from spin. For many years, the city and state counted credits and graduation rates differently, and both the city and state tightly controlled access to key school data. Now, there's more disclosure. But it's still difficult to compare charter and traditional schools because charters have different reporting requirements. Nor is it easy to compare measures like progress report grades because the criteria and cut scores change from year to year. Test score data was supposed to make comparisons easier, but in practice, it doesn't. The city's performance on state tests improved dramatically from 2005 through 2009, leading the mayor to boast about his education success story during his campaign for a third term. But serious questions emerged about the rigor of those tests. When the tests got tougher and scores were recalibrated the following year, the city's performance plummeted. Nor are test scores the only area where progress is uncertain, perhaps even non-existent. The end of social promotion didn't actually occur as envisioned. Children are still regularly promoted, unprepared for higher grade work. And the achievement gap that separates white and Asian students from black and Latino classmates continues to loom large. Another reform, ongoing closures of large high schools, has had complex consequences. As waves of big high schools were closed, other large schools were forced to absorb greater numbers of high-need students, challenging them even more. Mayor Bloomberg's support for the co-location of charter schools in traditional public school buildings often led to conflicts within communities when a local school was forced to make room for a new charter. Meanwhile, charter schools faced ongoing critique for cherry-picking kids from motivated families and serving fewer special ed and English language learner students, leaving those harder-to-educate kids to the traditional public schools. Test prep grew to dominate life in some schools. Recess went by the wayside in some grade schools. Others incorporate daily test prep ahead of standardized testing season. Some require weekend test prep for struggling students. Testing has figured prominently in the deteriorating relationship between Mayor Bloomberg and the teachers' union. Relations weren't always poisonous. Teachers won a huge raise and agreed to higher standards early in the Bloomberg years. But the city's teachers have been waiting for a new contract since 2009, and now face professional ratings linked to those volatile test scores. The mayor makes no secret of his distrust of the union. He suggested he be comfortable with mass teacher layoffs and huge spikes in class size. Like others who've questioned his school reforms, parents, advocates, scholars, resistant teachers have been routinely dismissed as selfish, concerned more about adult interests than those of the kids. At the same time, the DOE's business-savvy top staff awarded hundreds of millions to IBM and other private companies for systems that were delivered overdue, spectacularly over budget, and fraught with bugs. Perhaps the nadir of Mayor Bloomberg's control of the schools was the brief troubled anointment of Hearst magazine executive and education neophyte Kathy Black, who was unceremoniously booted out of the DOE within 3 months. It was a rare case of change at the top in Bloomberg's school system, which has centralized control, but decentralized responsibility for school performance onto individual school leaders and teachers. There is progress that the mayor can point to. His greatest education achievement is the rise in the city's high school graduation rate, the only education metric he mentioned in his final State of the City speech. Despite tougher diploma requirements, more students are graduating. Stubborn differences across demographic groups persist, and most graduates are not college ready. The mayor himself has acknowledged that there is a long way to go. But now, as he nears the end of his third term, both the mayor and Chancellor Dennis Walcott threaten doom and destruction if any of the city's education reforms are rolled back by the next mayor. The recent release of scores from the final set of standardized tests, however, exposed holes in the mayor's assertions about school performance. On 2013's tests, based on Common Core standards, only a third of city students scored proficient, better than other big cities in New York State, but far below what earlier years' tests had estimated. Those two key measures, improved graduation rates, poor test scores, make it hard to say what overall impact the mayor's ongoing school reforms have had. But Bloomberg's claims of rampant progress are out of step with the data. Were intentions all that mattered, this mayor just might ace the education test. In his dervish-like appetite for innovation and disruptive change, Mayor Bloomberg earned an A for effort. And the improvement in high school graduation over the past decade is solid B work.
But for all the emphasis on standardized testing, academic results are flat on trusted national benchmark exams, offering few signs that 12 years of reform deserve more than a D+. And the mayor's combative tone made enemies of many parents, teachers, and advocates who could have been powerful allies. The mayor's grade on working well with others definitely needs improvement.
Questions for discussion. Which of Mayor Bloomberg's school reforms made the most sense to you? Which made the least? What should be the next mayor's priority for the public schools? What grade do you give Mayor Bloomberg for his handling of the schools? Submit your answers and cast your grade at citylimits.org.